Welcome to Mitiga Mike, everybody. I'm Brian Contos. I'm the field CISO with Mitiga. Today, we have a really important conversation. We're going to be discussing Iran's cyber arsenal. And I have a fantastic panel joining us today. So before we jump in, I'd like everybody to give a brief introduction about who they are. Tom, why don't we go ahead and start with you?
Sure. My name is Tom. I'm the head of cyber research and AI for Rakia.
Okay. Ophir?
Hi everyone, I'm Ophir Osman from Google's Mandiant, researching nation-state groups with emphasis on Iran and supporting customers. Very happy to be here today and looking forward to this session, and thanks for having me.
Great. Sherman?
Hi, my name is Roy Sherman. I'm the senior director for the research team with Mitiga.
And last but not least, Ariel.
Hi, Brian. Ariel Parnes, COO and co-founder at Mitiga.
Great. So Ariel, let's go ahead and just stick with you for right now, because as we frame this, first off, why is Iran's cyber arsenal a topic of interest, right now? And really, why should security practitioners in the US and elsewhere be concerned?
Yes, Brian, I think the best way to look at it is kind of a very unique combination of three factors in the recent times that put us in a very interesting position with regards to the Iranian cyber threat. The first one is capabilities. Generally speaking, the Iranian regime has been developing and investing in cybersecurity capabilities or cyber warfare, I would rather say, for about more than 20 years, 25 years. All the way from starting with traditional simple DDoS attacks and website defacing to much more advanced, organized APTs and attacks that can actually inflict real damage. So the capabilities are there, and when we look at the threat actors in the world, Iran is somewhere in the top 3 to 5. So capabilities. The second one is doctrine. The Iranian regime sees the cyber warfare as one of the tools in their asymmetric warfare doctrine. The reason is that cyber warfare or cyber tools are rather, relatively low cost to be used. They offer a plausible deniability. They enable disruption and coercion and damage. They create psychological impact, and they have unlimited reach, right? You can attack everywhere. And so, and generally speaking, the cyber warfare fits into the Iranian warfare doctrine, not just in theory. We've been seeing them, and we'll hear about that now. We've been seeing them acting and using these capabilities in different situations. So capabilities, doctrine, and the third one is the current geopolitical context. And when we look at what's happening now in the recent days and months, and it changes on a daily basis, we have the Midnight Hammer operation by the United States to strike the nuclear capabilities in Iran. If you look back 10 days or so, we have the Rising Lion operation by Israel striking the Iranian nuclear and missile program. So that gives a certain context. But more interestingly, when we look in the Middle East in the region, and we look also back a few months ago, we see some other things happening that provide a broader context of what is going through or what's happening with Iran recently. First one is the regime, the Assad regime collapse from about half a year ago, and the Iranian and the Hezbollah or Israeli attack against Hezbollah a few months ago as well. These two changed the geopolitical context for Iran because they were part of their strategy in having influence in the region and using them as proxies. So generally speaking, when we look at the current situation of Iran, we see that they are in a very unique position, now going into probably talks about the nuclear program in some kind of a treaty, in a very unique situation where the use of cyber warfare for creating damage or coercion or different purposes would be more than reasonable from their perspective. And so the combination of the capabilities, the doctrine, and the current geopolitical context puts Iran in a place where they may consider using these tools in a different way, more aggressive way. And us, as in the US and the Western countries, they put us in a place where we need to be thinking about how we can be prepared to this new situation.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great overview, Ariel. And I think the asymmetry of cyber war across any country really shows that you can amass a great deal of power with relatively low expense and effort, juxtaposed to perhaps enriching uranium, as you mentioned. But let's double click on actors and their motivation, and really these strategic shifts. And Ofer, maybe I can direct this one at you, but who are the key, Iranian cyber actors today, and how has this changed, or has it changed over the last few years?
Yeah, so we've been observing very extensive activity on behalf of multiple Iran Axis threat actors. They've been targeting Israel, targeting the Middle East, as well as additional geographies worldwide, US, Europe, and anywhere and anyone that might possess strategic intelligence of interest to the Iranian regime. Now, we see a combination of both covert and overt activities within the Iranian threat landscape. When we say covert activity, we say activity aimed at silently collecting information in support of Iran's decision-making and intelligence apparatus. The overt activity, mostly hack and leak and wiping operations, is intended to conduct psychological warfare, sowing fear, causing confusion, especially in light and in support of global and regional events and conflicts and the geopolitical space which Ariel referred to, which Iran Axis threat actors, let's say, are not hesitant to take advantage of. Now, for the first category, the covert activity, we have been observing extensive activity by various actors, both ones that are publicly affiliated with Iran's Ministry of Intelligence and Security, or also known as MOIS, actors like ANC 3313, which are publicly known as Muddy Water, and APT-34, and also IRGC, or Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps affiliated actors, for example, APT-42 or ANC 1549. Now, if we take, for example, APT-42, IRGC affiliated, they are one of the most prominent Iran Axis espionage groups, conducting extensive phishing and malware operations against targets in the US, in Israel, and many other geographies worldwide across multiple sectors, media, academia, diplomats, and dissidents. And the main characteristic of these operations is their highly advanced social engineering, including interacting with their targets. They do this to gain credibility and eventually leading their target to some sort of a fake login page, for example, prompting them to enter their credentials, which are subsequently sent to the attackers. And while the method itself is pretty straightforward, when it's accompanied with very credible personas, well-crafted decoys, and ongoing interactions with the target, this significantly increases the chances that an unsuspecting victim might fall for that scam and eventually get phished by APT-42. Now, as for disruptive threat actors, we have observed a significant increase in their activities, specifically hack and leak and wiping operations, mostly against Israel-based targets and against Albania as well. And these campaigns are often coordinated with exposure attempts or efforts by online personas. For example, Karma Below or Handala Hack, which claimed responsibility for targeting Israel in multiple operations throughout the several couple of years, essentially since the October 7th attacks on Israel. and also Homeland Justice, which are claimed responsibility for targeting Albania. Now, these online personas often operate under the guise of cyber activists, also known as hacktivists, to disguise the fact they're affiliated with state-sponsored entities. For example, let's take Karma and Homeland Justice. While they exist as online personas with public claims of hack and leak and destructive operations, they have in fact been publicly attributed to Iran's MOIS. So a nation state activity in the guise of an hacktivist persona. Now, not only that, according to public reporting, some of these groups were potentially provided initial access to their targets by another MOIS nation state sponsored affiliated actor, which we track as UNC 1860, publicly known as a Secret Manticore. And this essentially suggests that UNC 1860 did the initial access and were acting as if they were an initial access provider for other MOIS actors. And essentially this demonstrates the potential link between disruptive activity and state-sponsored entities. Now, as for how they do it, we have observed extensive arsenal of custom wipers and destructive malware that sort of complements that public and overt activity. As I say, their prevalence has significantly increased since October 7 attacks. They are constantly evolving and often exploit regional or global events. And what we have particularly seen within these wipers and some of the non-wiping malware used by Iran access actors is an increased use of malware that incorporates GUI or graphical user interface to disguise malware execution as legitimate applications. So this sort of complements the social engineering operations that I mentioned earlier, and essentially makes a wiper potentially seem like a legitimate software behavior observed by the user. So really, operations all across the board for various goals and targets, and very varied in their TTPs and the actors that stand behind them.
Yeah, Ofer, thanks for that. You know, we're getting some questions in live as well, and I just want to let everybody know if you do have questions, please feel free to submit those during this live stream. But Ofer, let's stay with you on this one, because I want to sort of drill down into motivations. And I think it's fair to say that in general these are politically motivated attacks. But what are the goals? What are sort of what's the strategic logic? What's the end result here that they're trying to reach?
What makes the clock tick?
Yeah.
So
in 10 seconds or less. No.
Yeah, 10 seconds or less. Shoot. So these actors are, since they are believed to be operating on behalf of Iran's regime, naturally their goal is to support that regime and their security apparatus and deliver any intelligence or impact that serves and protects the Iranian regime. Now, diving into specific goals, there's the mission, the most obvious task of collecting intel on strategic issues of interest in support of decision-making in Iran. Could be leadership and could be the intelligence apparatus itself. And these would include, for example, targeting diplomats, government or defense organizations. And we often see those types of activities conducted on behalf of APT42 and UNC 3313 or Muddy Water, as I mentioned earlier. And essentially, they are interested in anyone who might possess strategic data, which might shed light on Iran's adversaries and entities that are in support of those adversaries. Now, another mission or goal would be collecting tactical and sensitive data on persons of interest, which might lead us to the PII category of collected from anyone who might be in possession of it. For example, government or telecommunication companies, often targeted by Muddy Water, for example. Now, this category might also include targeting of the shipping sector, for example, to gaining tactical visibility and intelligence, which might be potentially leveraged for further operations, from hack and leak to even enabling kinetic warfare. Another goal might be collecting information on anyone perceived as a threat on Iran's regime, for example, public opposers of the regime, dissidents, journalists, media, and APT42 tends to target these sectors, for example, using well-crafted laws, advanced social engineering, as I mentioned earlier, often using issues related to the Middle East or human rights incorporated into these operations. And finally, we get to the broader targeting or opportunistic targeting, which we often see by Iran Nexus actors in some sort of an attempt to leverage that access, for example, in hack and leak operations, or to use it to gain access into additional entities. And they are not necessarily focused in a particular entity, but more on leveraging the data and access and potentially leaking it or leveraging in some sort of a way, in a way that for hack and leak operations, for example, will create panic and sow fear and confusion. And we've seen this particular goal serves basically in particular times of action, regional or global events. This is where this goal is served the most, as far as we can see. For example, when there's an escalated conflict in the Middle East as part of the Iran-Israel conflict over the past years, this might explain the reemergence of some of the hack and leak personas we've observed, as well as emergence of new personas claiming responsibility for various data leaks and intrusions. And we constantly see an uptick. Whenever something's going on, there's an uptick there.
Wow, that's amazing. And exactly at 10 seconds, Ophir. That was perfect. Thank you so much. Let's turn just a little bit, because I want to dive into the modus operandi. So the TTPs and some real world investigations, if we can. So Sherman, maybe turning to you, what's some of the technical tradecraft that we're seeing and the tooling that's kind of common amongst these Iranian operators?
So the first thing will be, it's very diverse. They fit the type of tooling and methods they use based on the targets they choose. So when they're targeting specific personnel or people directly, they would use one type of tools. When they go after corporations and organizations, they would use different types of tools. However, something they're very distinct is that so far, there were very, very few samples of them using their own 0 days or their own specific exploits. What they usually build themselves would be the malware when they deploy it. But even that malware, if we put aside the encryption and quote-unquote ransomware, is mostly using known techniques and known TTPs. So for example, when they try to get an access into the organization, they will go through a web application. When they land on that, they will deploy a common web shell. Those web shells are very commonly found, whether in open source projects and used by pen testers and red teamers. Even when they deploy their C2 for command and control, they will use public and open source frameworks for that. However, they do learn and evolve from an operation throughout the years, and they, in a lot of cases, they will leverage legitimate services. Most cases would be cloud services such as Dropbox for communication, or any type of DNS tunneling via infrastructure using S3 buckets or GitHub repositories for that type of C2 and command and control. And eventually, even when they land inside the network, a lot of the tools they use are quote-unquote off-the-shelf open source, very common with pen testers. We can see AD Explorer, unpack, their own customized versions of Mimikatz. So in a sense, they're using what pen testers and red teamers, and I would say most threat actors, are using in a very different way that we see other APTs. Usually when you look at APTs, whether those are Russian-based or any other big country, they would have their own tooling they bring into the table. They have their own uniqueness, their own advancements, which makes it much harder to pick up and detect. But eventually, even in Iranian operations, we do see they leverage a lot of end days instead of 0 days. So meaning where a lot of other countries will use their intelligence capabilities to have their own 0 days to get access into systems where it wasn't patched because nobody other than them know about it. The Iranian threat actors are usually taking exploits from vulnerabilities that are already exposed, already being published, and they pick it up when it's being published. They're scanning the internet basing on the ranges where their target lays on. So if they're targeting an Israeli corporation, they will scan Israelis' IPs and then will try to fire those exploits to see whatever they can land. As Ophir mentioned, in a lot of cases, some of their goals is to just fear and awe. They want to cause a shock with the public. So they'll go into a big known organization. In Israel, in one case, it was a matching organization that helps people date. And they'll just, all right, stole everything and going to lick it. We don't care about the ransomware. They'll play with their victims. They will do communications. They will do negotiations. But eventually, their target is to just see that seed of horror in the end of the day.
Got it. Got it. And we're getting a lot of questions coming in, by the way. For those of you where we don't have the time to reach those, we'll get to you after the fact and respond over email. But let's keep this one with you, Sherman. How are these attackers maintaining persistence and evading detection in cloud SaaS environments?
Usually they'll go after creating their own users, their own administrators. They'll leverage other accounts that doesn't have MFA that they can take over. They'll use off tokens or API keys. They will create those persistencies within the environment to try and blend in with other keys or other non-human identities to keep those to be able to interact and connect to the system once they have been discovered. They will also try to take over administrative accounts to lock their owners out of it. So they will be the only ones with permissions within the environment, which helps them have a lot of very big control over the IR efforts and the recovery efforts, which makes them very, very effective. When they go into the non-cloud, they will use the common ways that we are familiar with like registry modifications or scheduled tasks, DLL hijacking. But in a lot of cases, they will target the administrator devices, endpoints with a remote management software or some type of a malware. So will be able to keep collecting those authentication tokens, which will, even after they change the password, they will be able to steal the token and reconnect from a different place.
Got it. Got it. And we've had some questions come in about PSYOPs here, which kind of goes with our normal line of questioning. So I'm going to go ahead and turn over to Tom for now to talk about PSYOPs and defensive strategies around there. So how is Iran using PSYOPs or psychological operations in these cyber campaigns? And honestly, is it something that we should even be taking seriously at this point?
That's a great question, Brian. I will say definitely. We saw live examples of that in the recent week, which started at the beginning of the war, when they use AI to generate content. Now with all of the investments, with all of the agents, the outcome is terrifying for good and bad. Because if they're now going as prompt and saying Tel Aviv skyline hit by a rocket, we saw it live. It looks very similar, for the unprofessional eye, and especially for civilians that now running to shelters and everybody trying to understand what is the next news source to be listening to. That create chaos. And just one part of what they're doing live. The other part is they're sophisticated. I think Ariel said that at the beginning. They're very considered sophisticated attackers. And I will say it comes into the little specific details. For example, if you're trying to create chaos in your country, if we go way back, you could recognize, and you still recognize, low-key ransomware players using Google Translate before AI was invented, and then you can understand, okay, this is not his main language. Now they're utilizing AI to create Hebrew-based content, like very great Hebrew-based content, which does the most craziest thing you can think of, which is gaining trust of Israeli civilians. And after we gained trust, we saw a surge especially on X, that you can see a lot of accounts, and it's happening in a lot of psychological operations, but the mass of accounts that was created content in Hebrew, trying to get traction from the Israeli civilians, make them follow, and then publishing that fake content that here 100 people died, here was another attack that the media, they're trying to create chaos inside of Israel. Another things that we saw from psychological operations is they're very sophisticated on timing those psychological operations. And by that, I mean, soon as they aim to launch rocket, they impersonated the home front command and send text to Israeli civilians calling them to go inside shelters. Now, if you think about that, let's think that every alarm, every siren kicks the whole country back to the shelters. Creating a disbelief in a critical system while you're in a war can create multiple outcomes that can cause in a civilian's life. I think we can talk a lot about, and Ophir mentioned it before, all of the social engineering part. They're very strong at that part. They're very sophisticated in that part, and they know how to make the civilians scared. Yeah, but this is from just like the main topics because we're very short on time. This was, I think, the main topics we can discuss about that really can create chaos. And again, I think it's also helped them to create some kind of everybody. I will try to be politically correct. There is a lot of people out there, they would like to see Israel getting hurt, and creating that content that actually say, oh, Israel hurt, or here is a building explode, unfortunately tracks a lot of traction, a lot of followers, and then every single post that come from that post look more legitimate and create more chaos.
Yeah. Well said, Tom. And we've had like 6 different questions come in, and we don't have too much time left, so I'm going to try to truncate this a little bit. But Tom, we'll start with you, but then I'll open this up to the group. What can defenders do to sort of strengthen their posture? And are there any type of tabletop exercises that can be leveraged that might be focused a little bit more in terms of mitigating threats from these Iranian actors? So Tom, if you want to start off.
Sure. I will start on being proactive. Don't wait to get attacked, because it's not a question if, it's a question of when. And you want to be as much as ready for that. So I will say log retention. I will say enrichment, parsing, adding visibility where you don't think you're gonna need it.
Great. Anybody else want to chime in on that one?
Yeah, I think something easy and very impactful to do is to test your detections in scale. So we know that we have MFA bombing, and we know we have password sprays, and we know we have a lot of common attacks that we are familiar from every other actors. Bake those attacks into your next red team or penetration testing. Have them a part of an entire attack scenario where you can start with the phishing using SMS to your executives, to some of your non-technical employees. Get those credentials, and then try to do MFA bombing to some of your employees. And the purpose is not to see if it works or not, because it will work eventually. Eventually, every attacker will get in. But how long does it take your team to pick it up? Because when it will hit your identity provider until it get to your SOC, it will take time. The question is, would it be 10 minutes, 30 minutes, hour, or 24 hours? And what you're going to measure is the amount of damages and impact the attacker can do within that time frame, and how do you want to shorten it. Identify the gaps. Do you see all of the authentication methods? Can somebody use a legacy authentication on your tenant, or they have to use the MFA? When they get credentialed, they can use a legacy protocol maybe to get in. When they do, can your SOC team pick it up? Does it get the right severity? Do they know how to investigate it within the cloud environment and figure out what happened fast enough to tear it down?
Great. Thanks for that, Sherman. And we're almost at time. So what I'd like to do is just hand things back to Ariel now to, wrap this up and conclude today's panel conversation.
Perfect. Thank you, Brian. And thank you, Sherman, Ophir, Tom, for this session. I know you guys have a much more to share, but with the limited time, I think we at least touched a few of the topics that we wanted to touch, and appreciate that. Just to wrap up, I think what we've been saying here in this kind of a 30-minute session is that certainly Iran has has a wide range of capabilities to use cyber warfare or cyber. Not just, as Ophir mentioned, not just for espionage, what we usually call CNE, computer network espionage, but also CNA, computer network attack, meaning inflicting damage, or CNI, computer network information operations, or PSYOPs. So they have the full range of capabilities. They have the doctrine that supports the strategic usage of these capabilities, and they have the need or the motivation with the current geopolitical context that leads them to a place where they most probably are considering or will consider using these tools against Western targets, against the US, against Israel. And what we learn or try to mention during this session is that there are things that we can do. Awareness and education is the very first thing that we need to do. This is what we're doing here. Raising awareness in the industry, in the organizations, to the threat, to the specifics of this threat actor. The second one would be tightening security posture, what we can do to prevent this attack or this types of attack from happening, and given the knowledge and the understanding of what tools and capabilities the Iranians may use. The third one would be increasing alertness to be able to detect these attacks as soon as they start, so we can stop them before they materialize, either with the ongoing monitoring or with a more proactive approach, which is threat hunting, actively looking for dormant attacks in our environments. And last but not least is exercising and testing, whether it is with a red team exercise or a very hands-on simulation, all the way up to strategic tabletop exercises, testing operational capabilities, procedures, plans, and capabilities that we have in place. So all the range of exercises that will constantly uncover gaps in the context of this specific set of threats.
Great. Thank you for that, Ariel. And a big thanks to all of our attendees today. Thank you so much for so many questions. I know we were only able to get to a handful of them in this very short discussion. We'll get to the rest of them offline. And if we don't, for whatever reason, just contact us at Mitiga, and we'll be sure to have follow-ups with you guys. So to my panel, Tom, Ophir, Sherman, Ariel, thanks for being part of Mitiga Mike and being part of our live stream today. And with that, we'll see you next time.
Thank you.